You're watching NCTV on Zoom. I'm Anne Marie Battistone, and this is State and Local. And I just want to thank Katie for setting this all up for me because I could never have done it by myself. My guest today is Ed Haddad, and he wants to talk about revenue risks and the need to cut the budget so that we don't end up with a shortfall. He's wondering if people might be interested in knowing about the sources of revenue. So thanks, Ed. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Anne Marie, to talk about, I think, something that's a really important subject right now, especially in light of what's going on in the world around us today. And I think it's something that a lot of people may not clearly understand when we talk about budgets. I think people assume that all of our budget money that we use to fund the departmental budgets is coming from our tax revenue. And that's a logical conclusion, but that isn't exactly the only source of revenue for the town. And that's why I'm concerned. Now, I'll just go through some of the major revenue sources. For those of your listeners who may not be aware, the budget is approximately $41 million. That's what it's set at. That's the original versions of the budgets before any reductions have come through. Now, to fund that $41 million, the town has approximately $32 million of tax revenue. These are taxes that have been billed in prior years, our established homes. The tax bills that we just got and paid amount to $32 million. So there's another $9 million that is coming from somewhere else that I want to talk about today. Now, included in the new revenues, there's an estimate of new taxes being new homes or new businesses or that kind of thing, new buildings that go up, of $600,000. In addition to that, the state is estimated to contribute $4.4 million. Local receipts, so these are receipts that the town collects from a variety of different sources, different fees, fees that we pay, could be permitting, different things. That's another $4 million. And then there's a small amount built in that's going to be used of free cash, which I'll explain to you in a second what free cash is for the viewers that may not know that.
Hey, could I ask you a question about that 600,000? Because when I was watching the Board of Selectmen, it seemed as if they were saying that back in January they anticipated $600,000 worth of growth. Now, does that mean taxes that would come in from the new people moving in? Is that what that is?
Yes. So these are buildings or houses that haven't already been taxed, that they're not in our existing $32 million worth of taxes. So
and Todd seemed to say that in the end of June that they weren't expecting that to materialize.
I wouldn't expect it either. I mean, that's an estimate based on history. But again, in light of the financial situations, a lot of people could be stopping construction or construction could be delayed. So until a house is occupied, the tax bill doesn't start yet. So even if you have construction in progress, it's not being taxed right now. So like I said, so that very well may not happen in light of the financial insecurity that people might be experiencing. So let me just go back. So the free cash that they're estimating is a little bit over $200,000. So those four sources that I just explained, the new growth taxes that we just spoke about, the state aid of $4.4 million, the local receipts of another $4 million, and the free cash of $200,000, that's $9 million of additional revenue that the town needs to balance their budgets the way they're currently written. And that's what my position is, and I think we have the most risk. There's no risk that our tax bills that we're already paying, that's not going to change or disappear. People might be delinquent on some of their taxes, but they're going to pay their taxes. We know that. But there's $9 million of revenue that's anticipated that clearly is at risk based on the situation. I don't believe the state is probably going to maintain their original estimate of what they've given, because they're in the same situation we are. Everyone's in the same situation. We're not isolated, that's for sure. So we certainly have the risk that the state's going to pull back some money. We have a risk that new growth is not going to materialize. We have a risk that the local receipts are going to be something less because people aren't spending, and a lot of people just maybe don't have the money, and they're not spending at the same pace that they may have done it in the past. And we always have free cash. So of that $9 million, if you think about a simple 10% reduction, that's almost $1 million shortfall right there. And I think 10% shortfall is relatively conservative. It could be 15%, it could be 20%. So it could be, like I said, anywhere from about $1 million shortfall to $2 million shortfall, and who knows what else. And that's what my concern is when I ask the selectmen to look at the budgets now and develop a plan that says, geez, we need to look at these expenses now and hold back. We can't wait until the last minute. That's my position. So that's the risk that I want your viewers to understand. It's not tax revenue alone. Tax revenue is not so risky. It's these other revenues that are clearly at risk for giving the town a shortfall. Now, I just want to go into free cash because I know that comes up a lot, comes up at town meetings, and people think that, well, free cash, exactly that's what it means, is free cash. Well, free cash is a savings account. That's the town's savings account. So it accumulates in different ways. It accumulates from underspending at the budget, collecting more in revenues than we actually spend. It doesn't ever get refunded to taxpayers. It goes into this free cash account. It's a savings account. And we need to have that savings account. That's our security.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Who determines exactly how much of this extra revenue ends up in the free cash? I mean, can that be kind of shifted around without going into free cash?
No, it goes into free cash. I think there's state law that mandates you just can't take this money and use it around. It goes automatically, unused revenue goes into free cash, and then as the needs come up, it comes out of free cash. And those are things that we vote at town meeting. The other big thing that comes out of free cash is all of our capital expenditures. So when we buy new police cruisers, or we buy trucks for DPW, or if we buy new technology for the schools, for example, these big ticket items, that's all funded by free cash. There's no other budget item, budget allocation for those in the budget. It's a free cash item. So that's why it's important that we don't drain our free cash, because it's our security. And we use it for those big ticket items. A boiler goes, for example. And that has to be voted on at town meeting in order for it to happen. It just can't be taken out of free cash. But free cash is very important. It's a security blanket, really, for the town. So we can't depend on that, or we shouldn't depend on that to balance the whole budget in a big quantity.
How much is going into FY21's budget from free cash? Is it 27 million or what? Or,
going into free cash?
No, how much of the free cash is being used for FY21? Do you know?
A little over 200,000.
Oh, okay.
A little over 200,000.
Yeah.
So a relatively modest amount. And I think that was really just a balancing number to make the numbers all work together. It could be anything, but I think that's the balancing number. It becomes free cash. So that's the concern. So we have revenues, all the tax revenue plus the $9 million that I just outlined totals total revenue of $41 million. Now the expenditures for a balanced budget also equal $41 million. That's the balanced budget that they've presented. Now 33 million of that are discretionary. And I say discretionary, they're departmental budgets. Those include salaries and spending items within all the departments. And there's almost $8 million of what they call fixed costs. So these are health benefits, these are taxes, these are to pay off debt, prior year's debts, things like that, things that we have to pay. There's no discretion there. So right off the bat, we have almost $8 million of a fixed obligation that we have to pay. There's no question about it.
And that would be the teacher salaries and the union.
No, that's not included. These are only the only part of that has to do with salaries is there's benefits in there, health benefits. So because we have employees, we're obliged to pay for these health benefits, and that's included in that $8 million that I just spoke about. Now, things like salaries, supplies, fuel, those types of things are in what they call a discretionary budget, and that totals almost $34 million. And that's all the departmental budgets: the schools, the DPW, the police department, fire department, those kinds of things. So we have $33 million of discretionary funds that if we need to cut back, that's where we have to look. You know, it's not easy to do. It's not an easy thing to do because the majority of our spendings, and I don't have the exact percentage off the top of my head, are salaries. And we have a lot of our, if not all of our employees or most of our town employees are under a contract. And we have contractual obligations to pay a certain level of salaries and increases, you know, every year. It's contractual. And that's a problem, but it's not an impossible issue to deal with. And I think it's something that has to be considered because it is our largest budget item. And if we need to cut back, I think we need to look at every aspect to avoid layoffs. That's the worst situation.
And I think there are a lot of high salaries too.
Well, there are a lot of high salaries because you have a lot of supervisory and management level people that are in there, both in town hall and in every department. The school department has it, the police have it, the fire department has it, DPW. There's supervisors everywhere, and when you take their salaries and their benefits, that's why it's our largest budget item. And like I said, I am not advocating layoffs. I don't want to see layoffs. You know, layoffs don't help anybody, to be honest with you. That's why I'm advocating them looking at the discretionary spending to the extent they can, and even the contractual increases to try to avoid the worst case, which is layoffs, which is what we don't want to have happen. That's not good for anybody. I don't think.
What are furloughs, Ed?
Furloughs, what the difference between a furlough and a layoff is, a furlough usually refers that the person is going to be hired back. So that's the differential as opposed to a layoff, which isn't so certain. So if you had a restaurant, for example, that has to close, they'll furlough their people thinking that someday I'm going to reopen and I'm going to hire these people back. So that's usually the difference. They're almost the same, but there's a slight differential how people interpret the two words, furlough and then layoff. Layoff might mean long-term and you not necessarily are going to be hired back. So that's the situation that I want our taxpayers to think about and understand because it's complex, you know, and it's not really spoken about that often outside of the budget process itself. At the last meeting, for the benefit of your viewers also, at the last select board meeting, there was a discussion about approving the budget being the $41 million budget. The town manager, Blythe Robinson, was asking the select board to approve it as is. And the select board decided after much discussion that they would defer approving it, just for the reason that I just outlined.
Well, April 21st, isn't it, Ed? April 21st.
Sorry?
I think they're tabling it till April 21st.
Yes, I think so too. At least the discussion again. And what they're trying to do is hopefully get more indication from the state as to what their state allocation is going to be, and if it's going to be cut, and if so, how much is it going to be cut. They're trying to get better information. So I was very pleased that the select board, in their wisdom, recognized the risk that the town has in a revenue shortfall, which ultimately would be very bad news for us. You know, if we at the 11th hour suddenly found out that we couldn't fund and pay for the budget that we approved, you know, and then at the last minute having to go into every department and making cuts, which isn't good for anybody to have to do it after the fact. You know, we should be preparing for that situation now. If it doesn't happen, terrific. But if it does happen, at least we're prepared. And the people that might be affected clearly are part of the process, which is always makes you feel better if you're part of the process than being a victim to the process.
You know, I don't understand something about the state aid. Now, the 41 or the 40 million, is the state aid part of that or in addition to?
It's part of it. The state portion of the 41 million in our estimated revenue, the state portion is $4 million. And I believe that a lot of that is really school oriented.
I think that's called Chapter 70.
Chapter 70, right. There might be some lottery money in that as well. You know, we get a piece of the lottery.
How much do you think it amounts to? Do you have any idea?
The rich.
The state aid in the past. Do you have any idea what it?
Yeah, it's actually for the last 5 years, it's been around $4 million. That's exactly the money.
And that's including the prison mitigation money.
I believe it does. I'm not quite sure, But it's been about $4 million. It's increased very marginally from year to year to year, but it's still in that range, $4 million.
Now, is that 4 million just sort of dispersed as needed in the different departments, and who does that?
Well, it goes into the general fund. All money that comes in has to go into the general fund, I believe. It can't be targeted unless it's a specific grant or something. If everything, all monies that come in go into the general fund, and then they get dispersed out of the general fund. I think that's the way all municipalities have to work.
Oh, yeah, I knew of the general fund. I just meant that. So somebody has to make that decision about, once it's in the general fund, where to put it.
Well,
that's the town administrator, or is that the selectman? Do you know?
Well, it's both. It's really the town administrator in working with the department heads to prepare the budgets. And then ultimately the selectmen approve those budgets and they say, okay, we're saying it's okay for you to spend what you want, what your budget says. And that's the way the system works. So once these budgets are approved, sure, they can be stopped later, but that's what people are anticipating spending. And that's why it has to be balanced. You can't spend more than you have coming in. So that's a balanced budget. And that's what we have here with that, using that little bit of free cash, the 200,000.
But you know, on the town hall side, the only one, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the only one I hear talking about a zero balance or zero budget is Christopher Weeder. I mean, I don't see anybody else coming, getting on that bandwagon at all.
Well, I agree with you. It's disappointing. I know Chris early on, and even Cece early on, and probably in February, there was a select meeting then, had indicated that they'd like to see the budgets prepared without a bump up increase, a 3% increase. So let me go back to this Prop 2.5 increase that was built in. We're all aware of Prop 2.5, that our taxes can increase 2.5% without a vote of the residents. So initially what was put in was last year's tax revenue was put in, then it was increased by 2.5% because we can. And that was the basis of giving the budget parameters to each department head saying, well, you can spend 3% more because we have the money. And that's what I know the selectmen early on asked that not be given out initially, because our taxes keep going up. Our taxes are very high in Norfolk. Of the 10 surrounding towns, I think we're the highest because we have such a very small business base. So everything's on the residents. The residents are bearing the brunt of all of our tax revenue, almost all of it, about 93% of it.
And going back 20 or 25 years, it was very anti-business here. I mean, it's only been in the last maybe 10 years that there's been any kind of growth in business.
Yeah, and that's actually part of what the B1 downtown project is also geared to. It's not only that, but part of it is also to attract more businesses into the town. You get 2 or 3 benefits from it. Certainly you get tax revenue. It's a quality of life issue. People that live here like to shop here. You offer more. And it creates an activity in our town center. It makes it a more attractive town for new people, and it attracts new businesses and increases our property values ultimately. So we should be looking at areas in the town, not necessarily town center only, but areas where we can attract more businesses. We should be very much actively trying to get that in. In many towns where there's a large tax base, what you hear about a split tax rate where the businesses actually pay a higher tax rate than the residents do. And that's, I'll say, the ideal situation because it lessens the tax burden on the residents, the homeowners, and it puts more of a burden on the businesses who are more likely to be able to afford it. We don't have that luxury in Norfolk because we don't have a big enough tax base, a business tax base. So we don't have that luxury. Currently, our small business base pays the same tax rate that residents pay.
Now, I have a question. Now, when the shop owners make a profit in their business, this is kind of a stupid question, I guess, but I've never understood it. How much of that tax that they pay to the state goes back to Norfolk?
Well, that's the state aid.
Okay.
That's all part of that state aid, that the state takes in all the revenue from all sources, and then through some formula, and I don't know the formula, they give back to the towns.
And then if a business opens up on somebody's property, that's property tax that maybe hadn't been realized before.
That's right. That's new property taxes for the town. So any new building, not necessarily a retail store, but part of a building would pay more property taxes to the town. So the more businesses that we get to come in and they build a warehouse or a factory somewhere, or a building downtown, it could be residential and mixed use, they're going to pay property taxes. And that's all going to help all the other tax owners, taxpayers in the town, because it spreads out the burden.
And that's more than if it was just land they were paying taxes on.
Yes. The taxes on land are actually lower because the value is lower. So if you have a piece of land that's worth $100,000, you're only paying taxes on $100,000. If you build a building that's worth $500,000, now that property is being taxed at $600,000. So the actual amount of revenue bring in increases substantially. So that's why it's good to have some other buildings here. It's no different than residences too. If you have an empty lot, it's paying little or no taxes until you put a house on it, and then all of a sudden you're paying more taxes. So ideally, it would be helpful for us to get more businesses to share the burden of the tax base. But right now, we're spending a lot of money, and as a result of it, we're spending a lot of money in our departmental spending, and the whole burden of it is going on homeowners.
I wanted to ask you. I was watching the advisory board meeting. And Blythe said, I wrote it down. We're cautious to raise revenue any further because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Does that mean anything? What does that mean?
I'm not quite sure what she's in referencing that to, because they've already raised the revenues by the 2.5%. They've already built that in. So. And this year our taxes went up. The tax rate went up to 19.64 from what I think it was 1936 or something. I don't know exact, but our tax rate went up already. this year. In our first tax bills, we got a tax increase.
And it's hard to believe it's that high when you look at Medfield with all the retail that they have.
I know.
Which would, to me, would indicate that our salaries are higher than maybe they should be, right?
Well, it's hard to say. I couldn't say exactly because I haven't done a comparison, and it's hard to compare town for town because there's all these different nuances between towns, different populations, different requirements, who has a school, who doesn't have a school. But also remember, we pay a proportion of the King Philip system, this King Philip school system. We're paying into that. We make a contribution to the agricultural school, tri-county school. So we're making contributions to other things that, again, a lot of people maybe don't realize paying to. So the schools, so of our total discretionary budgets of about 34 million, the schools are 22 million of that. So almost two-thirds. Almost two-thirds of our total budget is just the schools, the Norfolk schools and the King Philip operating budget. Then if you add public safety and public safety, which is another 6 million, that's fire and police, you have almost $29 million of the 33 in just 4 departments. Elementary, King Philip, fire, and police. So that's where the bulk of our spending goes. The administrative departments, town hall, library, things like that are relatively small. They're small in comparison to the big ones. Those are the big ones. And again, I'm not advocating doing anything as far as layoffs, but I think we need to at least have a plan together for worst case.
It doesn't, I mean, just speaking strictly for myself, I don't get the feeling that's going to happen.
Well,
when you watch these meetings and you see how people react.
Well, it surprises me because I think sometimes people don't quite understand the revenue aspect. That's why I wanted to speak to it. I think everyone assumes the tax bill goes out and it's guaranteed that we have enough money to cover all of our spending. And we don't. It's not guaranteed because there's these other revenue sources, the $9 million that I outlined, that's at risk. A portion of it's at risk, not the whole thing, but a portion of it is certainly at risk. And I think that a lot of people do not understand that. They assume that it's set and secure. And once we set the budget, the tax bills go out, done deal, we're all set.
Right. Well, listen, thank you, Ed. I've just got to draw this in because we have a half-hour show. Well, okay. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope you'll come back again and talk about some more of these things. You seem very knowledgeable. Well,
you got to follow these things closely. Unfortunately, I've been interested in it because I'm learning at the same time, and I have been interested and learned a lot. And you really do have to attend the select board's meeting, the advisory board's meetings too, really to understand. There's a lot of nuances that are going on. It's not as simple as people might think it is.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Ed. Thanks so much.
Talking to you. Thank you.
And thanks for watching State and Local. My guest was Ed Haddad. He's a resident here in town who was wanting to talk to us about possible revenue shortfall. So thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll be back soon again on Zoom. I'm Anne Marie Battistone. This is Norfolk Community TV. Bye-bye.